Hello, my name is Rickard, and if you want to know how to put yourself in a Dune 2 character poster, stick around. I'm going to show you how to do that in Photoshop. If you'd like to follow along, I have included a link in the description of this video with all the assets that you need to follow along. It does include a gradient map that you're going to need in order to match the color of the original poster. So go ahead, download all that, and then let's dive into Photoshop. All right, let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is create a new file. So we're going to click on this new file button. Here I'm going to go to Photo, select any of these. This will just kind of get me my basic presets. Here I want to set this to pixels and 3200 and then 4000 pixels tall. I want the resolution to be 300. We'll make our background color black, although this doesn't really matter because you can change it. And then we'll hit Create. Next thing I want to do is basically set up some guides so that as you're following along, you can see where I'm placing things more easily. So let's go to New Guide Layout. Here, if we go to Default, this is probably what you'll see. Let's set our columns to 4 with no gutter, and let's set our row to 2, also with no gutter. For our margin, I want a 160 bottom and top margin, and then a 0 left and right margin. All right, next, let's pull in our model. To do that, I'm going to go to File, Open. And here in our Assets folder, you see 2 Cami Storm files. I'm going to open the second one, the 209 DNG. Because it's a DNG, it's going to open in Camera Raw. I've already done a lot of corrections to this. If we go here to these 3 dots and go Reset to Default, this is what it looked like straight out of camera. Here I'm going to go Reset to Open, and this is with our corrections done to it. The one thing I want to check before I open is just click on this link, make sure that we're on 16-bit, and make sure that we don't have resize turned on, and make sure that this is also not turned on. And let's hit OK, and let's hit Open. Okay, so now our file is open. The next thing I want to do is some skin smoothing. There's a few ways we can do that in Photoshop. First, let's just go ahead and make a copy of our layer. The most easy way is using neural filters. We can go in here and you'll see one of them is skin smoothing. If I turn this on, you can see right away that's done a halfway decent job of smoothing out her skin. So let's hit OK. And I'm OK with that. Let's do Command D to deselect. And let's call this layer Model. I'm also going to make this a smart object in case I want to come back in here and make any further corrections. I have that option. All right, next we're going to pull this into our main file. And here, let's go ahead and place it. I want this basically to be, I want her chin just below this. I'm going to do Command T for transform. Make this bigger. I want her nose just past this guide here. And then kind of the top of her hair separation right about that cross point there. So something along these lines. Let's hit the check mark. The next thing we're going to do is add our color gradient. And our color gradient is going to do all the heavy lifting of recoloring this image to match the Dune kind of sand, very orangey color scheme of that poster. So here we're going to go to our gradient map. And the way a gradient map works is it maps all the colors on the left of the gradient to the darks of our image and all the colors on the right to the lights of our image. So here you can see we're getting this kind of negative effect. But if I switch these two around and put the light on the light side and the dark on the dark side, you can see we're basically just getting a black and white image. So here we're going to create a gradient that basically goes from like a very dark orange, reddish, burnt reddish color to kind of a yellowish color. So something like this is basically what we want. But I fine-tuned this to match as close as possible to the original poster. So here what we can just do is click on import and grab from our assets folder the Dune gradient. And if we scroll to the bottom, you can see that Dune gradient there. So I'm going to select that and hit OK. And now the next thing we need to do is add some gradients and kind of some coloration changes to this. First thing is we're kind of losing too much detail on her face. So I'm just going to add a curve above this entire thing and just pull it down a little bit so we get a little more darkness, shadow, and light in her face area there. So probably to about there. Next, I need to add a gradient to the top and the bottom. So let's add a gradient layer. I'm going to go to my gradient tool, make sure it's on classic gradients, and here I want it to be on foreground to transparent, a linear gradient here, and then make sure my foreground color is black. I'm going to do a gradient from the top, a gradient from the bottom, and then let's go ahead and make another. We're going to call this background. And here I need to select just the background. So to do that, I'm going to select my model layer, go to any of my smart selection tools here, go up to the top, select cloud, and then click on select subject. And then here, if we have our contextual taskbar turned on, you can see we have this little tool here. This allows us to invert our selection. You can also go to here, inverse. So now I have just my background selected. I'm going to select this layer and add a mask. So here you can see this mask makes sure that whatever I add to this layer will only be added to the background. So with this layer selected, I want to go back onto my gradient tool, make sure I'm on black, and just add black on this entire side of her face like this. And then for this side, I want to add a white gradient, but I'm going to use the radial gradient, kind of go outside of frame here, and just start adding this kind of glow right here. All right, next, I want to do a little bit of dodging and burning. Dodging and burning basically is where you add lightness or darkness intentionally to your image, kind of manipulate the shading. So let's go ahead and turn off our guides with Command semicolon. And for the first one, we're going to be putting our lettering right kind of in the center here. So I want to make sure this is dark enough to receive my letters. So I'm going to go onto my lasso tool, just make a selection around this area where I'm going to have my lettering, and then add a curve. And here I'm going to bring the curve down like so. And because this is all happening under the gradient map, everything's being recolored by that gradient map. So something like this. Now this is doesn't look great, but the beauty of this mask properties having this feather is that we can get rid of the hard lines. And now it just kind of acts as this underlying dodge burn layer. So something like that. Can also do a little more intentional dodging and burning. So let's add a dodge and burn layer. We're going to set this to soft light. And then I'm going to use a very, very soft brush. So make sure the soft round pressure brush. I'm going to set the flow to like something really low, like maybe 5. And then using a white brush where I want to add highlights or lightness, and then a black brush where I want to add a little bit more darkness. Just like that. Okay, so that's pretty good in terms of the image. The next thing we're going to do is add our lettering. Actually, before we add the lettering, there's one other thing I want to do. And if you look at the original poster, you'll see that it has a really nice noise pattern on it. Somewhat similar to this, but far more defined. So in order to have one consistent noise layer on top of everything, what you can do is add a gray layer and then use one of our overlay blending modes on it. So first, let's go ahead and make a 50% brightness layer and just fill that. So now here, if I put this on overlay, you'll see that it makes no difference to our image because with overlay, gray has no effect on the underlying layers. But if I add noise to this, you can see right away that that noise sits on top of our image. Now, unfortunately, with the add noise, I cannot create that nice film grain. So rather than using that, what I'm going to do is convert this into a smart object. This is a little roundabout way to get film grain, but in my opinion, it gets you the nicest results. So here I'm going to go into the camera raw filter. And basically what I'm using is the noise inside camera raw to get me a nice noise effect. Now, just grain basically does the same thing as just adding noise, but I have this control of the roughness. And by turning that down, I get something that resembles much closer to the film grain that I intentionally want to put on this image. So for my settings here, what I'm going to do is create this noise, and it'll have about 68, and then this I want to be probably around 60. And then for the roughness, we'll put this on 15. And let's hit OK. Okay, and then this layer we're going to put on linear light. You can see that that has a very strong effect, maybe a little too strong. Let's put it underneath the gradient map. And there, I think it's giving me more the effect that I want, but even so, it's a little too strong. When you're using linear light, rather than reducing the opacity, you want to reduce the fill. That's going to lessen the effect. And I think probably somewhere around 35% is enough to give us a really nice effect across the whole image. And there you can see, even at this scale, it actually does help kind of blend our whole image together. Okay, so for now, I'm just going to turn off my taskbar. So let's go here, turn that off, and then I'm going to do Command semicolon and turn my guides back on. And let's go ahead and make the top titles first. So I'm going to set my color here to white, go into my text tool. I'm going to select Futura Medium as my font. I'm going to change this to 15 points. And then we'll just click here and type in Jane Doe, spelled the most obnoxious way I can think of. And here, let's open up our palettes. And I want this tracking here to be quite wide. I want this to be 540, so very spread apart. And then I want this to sit on this guide and then kind of shove off to the left. I'm going to hold down Option and then just drag this to the right. That'll make a copy of my layer. And then back onto my type tool, I'm going to change this to is and change this to 10 points. We'll move this kind of toward the center there. And then if I select my Jane Doe again, hold down Option, drag this to the right again. Here, I'm going to change my font to Georgia Bold and change my font size to 21 points. And then change my tracking to 180. And then here, we're going to change this to Princess Irulan. And then we'll just kind of space those so that they're equally distanced from the is. And then if I select all three of these layers and do a Command T for transform, that'll show me where my center is. And I'm just going to center that up on our image there. Okay, next, let's go ahead and take our Jane Doe layer, hold down Option, and just drag that down here. onto this baseline down here. I'm going to change the font size here to 22. I also want to change my font from Futura Medium to Futura Light and change my tracking here to 160. And then we'll go ahead and change this to 03.01.24. And let's do Command T and just center that up. And then hold down Option, drag this up. And then I'm going to change this to only in theaters. And then select all with Command A, change that to 9 points. And change this to 120. And then we'll just place this on top of there, about there. Okay, next we need to create the Dune lettering. Now the Dune lettering is not a font. It's just using one basic shape rotated in different ways. So first, just so that I have the size correct, I'm going to zoom in right into the middle here. And on my guides, I want to change this from normal to fixed size and change the width to 150 pixels and the height to 150 pixels. Now, if I click in my image, it's going to give me these box, and then I can add some guides to the edges of the box. This is basically the shape I want my letter form to be. All right, I'm going to do Command D for deselect, and then select this tool here, which is my shape tool. I want to select the rectangular tool. I want to make sure this is on shape, not path, and then I'm going to start here and just make a shape that kind of spans across into this. You'll notice I have these. I'm going to select one of those and then just drag this to the middle so that my edge is circular. Next, I'm going to go on to my direct selection tool and just select this anchor point here and hit delete. I'm going to say yes. Now you can see our basic shape is taking place. I'm going to go ahead and select both of these anchor points. So here what I'm doing is I'm just making a rectangular shape. Make sure it's not selecting on any other anchor points. It's only selecting these. You can see which anchor points are selected because they're blue rather than white. Then we're going to take this and drag them to this guide here. And then here I want to change my fill to transparent, my stroke to white, and my stroke width to 11. And there you can see we basically have our shape in place now. We could call this D. Oops. Let's make it a capital D. And then if we zoom out, I'm going to go ahead and do Command semicolon to turn off the guides. Hold down Option to make a copy and drag this to right about there. And then to make this the E, I'm going to do Command Transform, Command T, and rotate that 180 degrees. So that's our E. And then this is our N. And then this is our U. Now I want to make sure these are all equidistant. First, let's go ahead and name them. And just to make this easier on myself, I'm going to put them in the same sequence that I want them. Select them all. And then here under Distribute, we can select any of these just so that they're all equally distanced apart. And then before I forget, let's also go ahead and add the part 2 between here. So I can just take this only in theaters, hold down Option, drag that up. You can see because I have my smart guides turned on, it's telling me when these are equally distanced from the U and the N. We'll go ahead and type in here, part 2. I'm going to select all, and here I just want to use an extended font. I'm going to select this, and here I want the font size to be 10, and I want this to be really far apart, so 980, so really far apart there. That'll be our part 2. And Make this a little bit bolder. It's a little hard to read as is. So to do that, I can go into my character. Now, this doesn't have a bold version, so I can kind of use this fake bold to just make it slightly bolder using Photoshop. And also, now that I've added it, I feel like we need to be just a little bit darker behind here to make this dune a little more readable. So I'm going to go behind my gradient map and just make a selection kind of behind this dune here, behind the part 2. So just something like this. Pretty rough. And then here I want to reduce contrast. So I'm going to reduce this, kind of bring up the bottom as well. So something like this. That'll just make this easier to read. And in order to hide it, I'll go into my mask and just increase my feather until you don't really visually notice it anymore. So about there. So not really visually noticeable anymore, but if I turn it on and off, you can see how much of a difference that's making in the readability of the part 2 there. So quite important. All right, the last thing we have to do is add our eclipse in here. So let's go to the top of our document. I'm actually going to take all these and put them in a group called lettering. And here, let's go ahead and do File, Place Embedded. And in our Assets folder, I've got this Flare 34. We're going to use this as our little flare. And I'm going to go ahead and rasterize the layer. I don't need it to be a smart object. And then I'm going to transform it, make it quite a bit smaller. I'm also going to change this to screen blending mode so I can a little bit better see where I'm putting it. So I want it there. I want to stretch it out more and make it thinner. So something like this. And then you can see that our edge is showing. So to get rid of that, I'm going to do Command M for curve and just bring this black point in until I'm not seeing that edge anymore. So right about there. I can also increase the brightness a little bit. And then I'm also going to do a black and white adjustment to get rid of the blue. And finally, just to make this a little bit softer, I'm going to add a few pixels of motion blur. And let's make sure the angle is on 0, and 5 should be enough. Good, that looks good. All right, and if we look at the original poster, you'll see that it has 2 flares. So I'm going to hold down Option, just make a second copy of this, like so. And then we can select both of these and just try to center them up a little bit better in this E. And then I'm going to add a new layer, go on to my elliptical marquee, and just make a little circle in here. This will be our little planet. I'm going to fill this with black. So to fill with my foreground color, I'm going to do Option Delete or Alt Backspace if you're using a PC. And for this, I want to add a little bit of an outer glow to it. So let's go in here and we can reset this to default, pump up our opacity, and we'll leave our size at about 22 pixels. I also want just a tiny bit of inner glow. Now I don't see it in the list here, but it is here. So we'll do inner glow, reset to default. I'm going to increase this a little bit, and I still want to see the edge, but I want it to be soft. So maybe around 50% is good. And probably around 7 pixels. Let's hit OK. Okay, and then if we look at the poster, it is a bit eclipsed or showing an eclipse. So I'm going to kind of do this and just make it a crescent shape by adding this as a mask. So I'm going to hold down Option so it cuts it out. And there you go. Let's do Command 0. And there you can see our final poster. So there you have it. That's how you recreate that poster in Photoshop. And once you have the file set up, all you need to do is replace your background photo, redo the dodge and burn step, and voila, you have the same poster, but with whatever photo you want inside of it. The beauty of the gradient map adjustment layer and the noise layer as we created it is that they sit in the layer stack. So anything you put underneath will immediately adopt all those characteristics. Now, if you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe to my channel, leave a like, leave a comment, share this video, turn on your notifications. And if you're interested in other Photoshop training and tools, check out Nucly.com. I sell all sorts of training for Photoshop artists and compositors, as well as photographers. So check that out. Also, here's some other tutorials for you to look at. And I will see you next week.